Welcome back to another episode of Psychocinematic. Today, my guest is Conor Patrick Walsh, who was the writer of O.C.D, the short film directed by Luca Pizzoleo. I'm excited to talk to Conor because writing is the first step of making your film and can clearly make or break your film. I also want to pick his brain about writing comedy because to me, that's super intimidating, and that's actually the next film that I want to do is a dark comedy. I selfishly get to ask him all these questions and bring you along for the ride. So without further ado, here's Conor. Thank you so much for doing this. I appreciate your time. I want to ask you about your writing process and just the ins and outs of writing O.C.D as well. But before we get into all that, could you share a little bit about how you got into writing and, how long you've been doing this, how you met Luca, all those things?
Yeah. Thank you for your time as well, by the way. You got a great show. So yeah, it's cool to be on it. How I got into writing was, my parents just had a lot of good stories about growing up, and they grew up very different to me. Fascinating to hear, stories of a life that was just different to mine. When there was anything at school that was like a story assignment, I would always try and take elements of their stories and, turn them into something a bit more dramatic or whatever. And whenever I did that, it was, when I would get the best grades. Not only did I enjoy telling the stories, but I also enjoyed the fact that it was when I felt best at school because I was getting validation for that work. And then, from there, I think my parents saw that, that I liked to tell these stories and to hear these stories. So they would show me their favorite films. I think when I was about from 12 to 14, they showed me a lot of their favorite films. And, there's like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and a lot of the 70s classics, Five Easy Pieces, Dog Day Afternoon. And then the one that kind of made me sort of put two and two together and go, oh, maybe I should try and write stories for film was True Romance. The trailer scene is when I was like, wow, this is a pretty amazing thing to write for because there was so much sort of incredible tension and subtext in that scene. And my dad showed me that scene multiple times. The first time we watched the movie, like, he just sort of rewind and play it again and be like, listen out for when he says, I will have a Chesterfield now. And that's when everything switches and all this sort of stuff. So, from then I just sort of tried to learn as much as possible about, what it is to be a screenwriter and to write a script, as opposed to writing a short story or whatever. And then, I studied it at school and the university, screenwriting and producing, and did a year out here at UCLA. That was like a professional course and just, kept learning, kept building. And, but the origins are, mostly my parents and their story, but also just, being Irish. You're told a lot of folklore as well. And it's a real tradition, storytelling in the cultures that I come from. So, yeah.
It's funny that you brought up True Romance because I actually haven't seen the movie, but I'm going to watch it, not this weekend, but next weekend. A friend of mine, we're just going to do like a movie night and each of us shows the other person another movie. And that's the one that he's going to be playing for me. So I'm excited to see it, especially now knowing that it inspired you to, like, it just made everything click. So did you grow up in Ireland?
No, I grew up in London.
London.
But my family is just a very, very Irish family. I've got family in there. But I grew up in London, was born in Manchester, which is where my parents came from. And even Manchester itself is a crazy place, just full of stories. Like culturally in the late 80s and the 90s, it was pretty insane. The sort of bands that were coming out of there, the styles that were coming out of there, and even way before that, the Industrial Revolution, it was kind of the center of the world. So it's quite interesting.
And did you come to the States for school specifically?
So I have a godfather in Santa Cruz, hence the banana slug t-shirt. So we would visit him and then we start being like, oh, well, Los Angeles isn't too far. So we should do, a week there, a week in Santa Cruz. And it was all around the time that I was figuring out that I wanted to work in film. So I always wanted to move here. So whenever I got to the age where I could do like internships, just before this sort of holidays at university, I would sort of reach out to companies and, the Sony WikiLeaks sort of thing helped a lot. I got a load of emails off of that, just sent hundreds of them. And then, got internships over summers and Easters and all this sort of stuff until I had a sort of enough of a network that it was kind of easy to get that first student visa that was just for the year at UCLA. And then beyond that, to get the visa I'm on now, which is the sort of O1 artist visa that allows me to work But yeah, initially it was just that we were holidaying here, and then yeah, it just sort of linked up well with what I wanted to do.
Gotcha. So now have you worked up to the point where you are able to earn a living off of your writing?
Essentially, yeah, yeah, it's an up and down situation. It's that
Yeah.
kind of job then. Um, you know, I think it's all about, you can be a working writer, but I think the moment you've got something made is probably when you're in that position where you don't start worrying about the money running out. I mean,
Right.
so that's the goal. The next goal is to go from just being, a working writer, which is amazing, regardless, to sort of, the odds of becoming one are still very low anyway. It's something that is a huge achievement, to become a working writer. But yeah, the next step is definitely getting a load of shit made, basically.
What kinds of things are you working on writing?
One of them's like a sort of, I'd say, a John Wick kind of fight movie, where the world is just a little bit left of reality kind of thing. And it's sort of centered around a character who's a boxer. And another thing is a spy thriller that I don't usually sort of get drawn to those, but it was an idea that I was intrigued by. I sort of found an article on something, and yeah, I've got horrors that I'm working on. Yeah, I mean, I just try and mix it up, I guess. I can't go into like the details of what I'm writing, but genre-wise, I had a teacher in university who wasn't even, I don't think he was a writing teacher, but he was he was in the film department anyway. And he was sort of like, his advice was to stick to one genre. And I just hated that advice. So since then, it's been like my goal to defy that advice, basically. But I mean, even before that, I had too many ideas in different genres anyway. So it's not like it was all about that one teacher, but it was weird advice because you should just write what you're passionate about. So that's what I'm doing. Just, even when opportunities come up, I try and make sure that I have a way in personally, and it's not just because I'm getting paid.
Yeah.
You know,
How many of your own scripts, like O.C.D, have you had developed into a film or maybe a work of television?
the stuff that is like had my name on it, it's short. So O.C.D, there's a short called Tether. Yeah, I mean it's shorts and then a music video, that kind of thing, and then stuff that's not that I sort of helped on, or like either an assistant to a writer or was just helping in a sort of assistant capacity. Just the biggest one is obviously O.C.D, and that happened pretty quick because I mean, as you know, Luca's pretty efficient and just he knows what he's doing.
Speaking of the efficiency of Luca, I'm curious from your writing, was there anything that you witnessed either on set if you were there? I think I saw some set photos where you were there. Not sure if you
Yeah,
were there every day. Were there things that he did direction wise that you felt elevated something that you wrote?
100%. Yeah, 100%. I think most of the stuff that captures the sort of neurosis of the character, it was added. I'd have to go back to the script, but I think there's like a moment where the agent just leaves the store, says you fucked up, and it's the sort of sweep through the shelves, and it's like this real neurotic moment where everything is just too much for him. And I don't think that was anything I'd written. So yeah, I mean, he did quite a lot of that. Also, like the intensity of the cutaway for the String of Doom definitely wasn't written as that intense, but it really works. To sort of like, especially for the tone of the thing, to sort of overdo his reaction to that. I think, yeah.
Yeah.
But he's amazing. Even I remember being on set when Stephen was there, and even Stephen sort of was like, "Listen, I've worked with some big directors, and you're more organized than most people out there." Like, and he is. It just everything's so efficient, and he's got everything in a folder, and it's amazing to watch him at his age, especially. Just know what he's doing.
Yeah. So when you write something, so like with O.C.D, for example, if there is any sort of improv and you're like witnessing it happen, how do
Yeah.
you feel about that? Does that like bother you? You're like, oh, I didn't write that. Or, like, I hope this one doesn't stick because I think what I wrote was better, something like that.
Yeah. No, I'm fine with it. I think at the end of the day, like actors aren't puppets at the end of the day, right? They're not just there to sort of read. I think that what they want to do is get into the skin of their characters. Sometimes, as long as they know, the intention behind the character, like what their wants and their needs and their wounds, etc., are, and they've kind of been curious about what the original intent is, then I think the improv can only build on that original intent. Of course, as long as the original has been tried, so that that's
Yeah.
in the can sort of thing, then But even then, especially for O.C.D, I mean, I wasn't on set the whole time. I just trusted that Luca and everyone knew what they were doing. Do you know what I mean? But yeah, it doesn't bother me. I think we'll see when it comes to some sort of a huge feature length sort of monologue. If someone just decides to say 2 words instead of this masterpiece I've took down, then maybe I'll have some feelings about it. But at the same time, sometimes less is more. So it's part of the process. Is that the more people that come on to the filmmaking process, things are going to keep changing, and as long as those changes are in line with the original intent of the character and the themes and the story, then it's something that you just got to build a tolerance for and understanding for. That things should keep evolving. And even when it's released, the audience interpretation of everything you've done is the next evolution. You know what I mean? So,
Right.
yeah, I try not to be precious about all that sort of stuff.
Are you a believer of writing with an actor in mind? Is that something that you try to steer away from, or do you like doing that? Not sure if you knew which actors Luca was trying to get for the film in the moment of writing.
I don't mind writing with one in mind. Again, it's like I don't want to get precious about that either, because then once it gets to that point where that person's unavailable or that person says no, you set yourself up for this failure of well, it can't be as good as it was going to be because the person I wanted is, I think it's cool to have people in mind, especially because what you're really doing is thinking of their essence or the essence of a character they played. With Stephen, he's had that essence before where he commands the space. There were a few people who can command a space like that that we also discussed, and it wasn't like we kept it honed in on the one dude. At least in my mind when I was writing it, because again, I think you can set yourself up for this disappointment. But I think as long as you're not too married to it and it helps you get the essence of the character out on the page, then yeah, it can only help.
Yeah. So after your experience on O.C.D, do you ever foresee yourself directing something that you wrote?
Yeah, I mean, I'd always wanted to, for whatever reason, whether it was confidence or fear, of taking those steps. I never sort of did it in my, at the age that Luca was at, in my 20s or earlier. I think the one thing I directed, and it was you could barely call it directing. It was like a music video, but the whole thing is basically just, shooting a holiday. So just loads of party scenes. It's not really directing. It's not like I was a plan. You're just going around,
Right,
capturing whatever you're doing. So, but I think that was the most I could do with the level of sort of fear that I had around directing, because it was kind of loose. There wasn't an official feeling to it. But yeah, I think after seeing Luca, it definitely is very impressive that he's able to sort of, he's almost gotten past the fear to the point that now it's a habit to direct things, So yeah, it'd be great to be able to try to get to that place one day. But yeah, I think for now, writing is certainly the main passion. But obviously, as you're writing, you're seeing everything in your head. So it feels like a step that I'll take somewhere down the line. It's not a next step, but it's certainly something down the line that I'd love to do.
So you were saying earlier that you also had OCD or have OCD. Can you think back to a time when the OCD first set on, or maybe there was a point in your life where it intensified? Because I have OCD as well, but I feel like I can think of the exact moment where things just got much more intrusive and obnoxious in my head. Before it was pretty manageable. I mean, it's still manageable, but I would probably never be like, oh yeah, I've got OCD. I probably wouldn't even have recognized it until this point?
For me, the point that I realized it was like pretty intense and just not something that everyone has. You know, I had the String of Doom is something that I had in my pocket, I'd say for about 10 years. Similar to to the end of the film, as I was getting something out of my pocket, whether it was a phone or a wallet, the string came out and I kind of panicked. And a friend of mine's like, what the fuck is that? And then everyone starts looking. I'm like, it's just, I keep it here. It's like, has to. And I kind of explained why it was in my pocket. And they were just like what? That is fucking insane. And I was like, but this isn't how you think about everything. And none of them did. So it was, it became sort of a part of the banter that I was psychotic. But it was, in my sort of teen years, as I was drinking heavily and partying heavily, that was when it kind of became more of a thing. You're going out trying to get girls and everything. It kind of intensifies the more that you're thinking about how people are seeing you. I guess that, at least for me, that's when it intensified. There were nights that some friends had to drag me out because I was like, no, I'm good, I'm fine. And I'd sort of like, I am quite introverted, but it was a bit ridiculous the amount that I stayed in. And it was all just to kind of avoid, the chaotic thoughts, the intrusive sort of thoughts that would come the moment I step out the door. And, feel like I hadn't done that right, or hadn't said a particular prayer all the way through or whatever. And, there were many times that when I was finally dragged out and would try and sort of just mask it with alcohol, that I'd sort of throw up at the start of the night. We get off the bus or something and just throw up, and everyone's like, why the fuck did you just throw up? And I'm like, I'm good, it's fine. And then the rest of the night would be fine after that, after a few beers. But yeah, I remember there was a moment where that anxiety really I threw up quite a bit at the start of nights out, because that was kind of the culmination of all that chaos.
That sounds super intense. I've never thrown up for mine. Yeah. Hate throwing up. So that would cripple me. Is there a scene in O.C.D. or just even a small part that you are the most proud to have written?
I mean, I do. I mean, I do love the ending, the sort of reveal. He lost the battle, but the war is, there's more to come, kind of thing. It's like it's not over, and he lost this battle. And I think, for me, a lot of the writing is more the subtext and the stuff behind it, rather than any dialogue that I'm more proud of. I think, character work and why certain things that most people don't spot, are there. That's what I'm always more proud of that stuff than I am of like a piece of dialogue. It's not what I've written, but what I love most about the sort of finished product is all the little details that a lot of people would miss. Like the sound design. There's that, if you listen close, there's, the world is falling apart beyond the walls of the convenience store. There's like, air sirens and all this sort of stuff, and which culminates with the two robbers. They're not just random robbers. They're the world's falling apart, and they've decided, fuck it, we're gonna rob the store. So it's that even though it's not, yes, it was written, subtly, but it's that I'm most proud of, like the way it all came together in the final product. And even the stuff on the TV is very thematic. There's a sort of talking heads argument on the news. One of them is like a super liberal and one of them super conservative, and like the chaos of their argument. And it's kind of like a comment on that, the state of the world, creating that sort of neuroses in people that are kind of caught in the middle of this chaos that they didn't sign up for. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the little details like that, I think, that I'm most proud of, everyone having contributed to it. It all came together like amazingly.
Yeah. Well, what I love about films like O.C.D. is that I'm constantly learning different things. Like, I didn't catch the fact that the robbers are coming is because the world is basically falling apart. And I love that detail. And Luca was telling me about the continuity things that people were annoyingly being like, oh, it's cool, but the continuity, like the things that you intentionally put in there to, show that it's not reality, what's going on at that moment. And yeah, love all that stuff. With your writing, since writing is also your day job. Beyond your work, do you sit down and try and write things that are just for you? Like, how long do you try to write, or is it a certain word count? Where do you try to write? Like, is
Yeah.
there just an environment that, stimulates the creativity the most for you?
I mean, I write from home mostly. Um, if ever I'm having issues, sort of mentally, like blockages, uh, I'll try and get out, like, go to a coffee shop or try and change the environment up a bit, or go and watch a movie instead of write. Just to try and get the brain working a bit. I guess for me, what I generally do is write in like hour increments. I try and split a day up into like 3 or 4 projects, usually 3, because I can write something new, I can rewrite something older, and then I can, towards the end of the day, I research something that I'm still formulating in my head. So the sort of rewrite research is kind of where I'd like to be. But, sometimes I do still get itchy and I'm like, okay, but I do need to, I want to try and write this one as well and rewrite this one as well. So, but I try not to like do more than like 5 hours in a day of actual writing or rewriting or researching. And, because at the end of the day, when you're in this industry, I certainly don't know how to switch jobs. So even if I'm at dinner or a coffee shop, or whatever, like I'm absorbing things that are going to be useful to me, regardless. So I try not to overthink, the amount of time or work I get done in a day. Because like I said, everything around me is gonna sort of be absorbed and help creatively somehow.
Right.
Every film I watch or show I watch or whatever, even every sort of YouTube rabbit hole I go down is gonna lead to something. Like the other week I just couldn't stop watching these ridiculous prank videos, but it led to me getting an idea sort of based in that world. You know what I mean? So, even those ridiculous things that make you feel like you're doing nothing with your lives, when you're creative, it can lead to creativity, I think. So I try not to get bogged down in sort of how many hours, but at this point I've created the habit enough that I am going to be doing 4 hours at least, even on a bad day.
Yeah. What is typical for you for like a draft count? Like, how many drafts until you get to your final draft?
Oh, okay. I mean, that varies all the time. I try not to be too much of a perfectionist when it comes to that. And I mean, my main goal is to find partners to get this thing made. So a producer or a director, or, so I'm not too precious about sending out a draft that isn't a final draft. It's definitely got to be polished. I always start with index cards, which is, kind of a draft in itself. And then I turn those index cards into a treatment, just sort of writing the whole thing out. And it's sort of like a scriptment, because there's dialogue in it as well, and there's scene headings, etc. Some scenes are more fleshed out than others. And then I use that to script. I call it a 0 draft, because it's still a little bit vomity. It's still just getting it done, sort of thing, getting it on the page. And then once I polish that draft, I send it to my reps. They'll give me notes, and either I'll implement all of them if I agree with them all, or I'll implement 1 or 2 of them, and then I'll be like, I think it's ready. And then we start looking for partners if there's something that feels like there's an appetite out there for it. Then once it gets picked up by a producer, and the director on board, or a star on board, or whatever, you're going to go through more drafts. You know what I mean? So that's why I'm not like too precious when it's just me, because it's like there's so much more to come anyway. And I think as long as the potential of the idea is there and the characters are well fleshed out in that initial draft, then you're going to attract partners, and that's the goal.
That's interesting hearing about the index cards and then treatment script, because I'm in the process right now of trying to brainstorm the ideas for my next script. And I'm just using like the notes in my phone to just kind of like write down the story beats before because I want to make sure that the idea flows and it makes sense. And then I can figure out why does this happen? And, why did that compel this person to do that before I start writing a script, especially because I'm not super efficient with like the script formatting and whatnot. That'll just slow me down. So I need to figure out the story. But the having it on index cards is interesting too, because then you can like physically see the order and move through it. I like that.
It's because it's a visual medium. So like the moment that I found that technique, I think it was Sid Field maybe had written about that technique. And the moment I tried it, it just made sense that, you've got the whole movie out there in front of you, and it makes it tangible and visual, Once you see all these cards in order, and you might have a load of empty cards at the top, but this scene, this scene, this scene, and because you've got everything in order, for some reason, like the brain being a sort of computer in itself, you're kind of putting in the question, what are these other cards and why? And for me, it's kind of like this, it's like a magical process. Once you have it on the cards, it just the answers start to come, out of nowhere at that point. But before all of that, I always start with character anyway, like character questions, because that's, my aim is to write character-driven stories, regardless of what genre. So that's the main thing. So I don't know if you do that, but it's really, there's a guy called James B. Hart. He wrote Hook and Dracula, and before he was a mate of mine, I was using his character questions that he has laid out. I think his app is called like the Heart Chart or something. It's pretty useful for like mapping out the sort of, heartbeat of your character's arc. For your story, I don't know if you do that or not, but it definitely will help you once you start with characters to get those story beats out, because then you understand the connection between, your story beats and your character's arcs so much more. And yeah, for me at least, it flows a lot more once I know the characters, what they want, what they need, their core relationship, their scars, and all this sort of stuff. Yeah.
That's interesting. I really need to look into that, because that's actually something that I'm battling with, because so it's a dark comedy, which I've got questions for you about dark comedy. But yeah, there's 3 characters. They're traveling maybe about an hour up into the woods to meet up with some friends at, like a dinner party, just like a cabin in the woods kind of thing. But they're not going to make it there. I have to figure out the social dynamics as to why like they won't be working together very well. For some of my characters, I have the ideas a little more clear in my head, but like for one specifically, like I have nothing. I've just been like, I don't know how to, like, I don't know if it's because this character is a woman and I don't know how to write for a woman, but I was like, I am really struggling here.
Yeah, I think what you'll notice that when you really dive deep into character, it serves everything else, and you'll have this richer story because of it, because everything will be linked to every beat, every moment is linked to the character's journey. Like even this is obviously it's a family film, but Hook, everything is so well tied together thematically, and in terms of like what Peter's fear is and all this sort of stuff. It's so well. It's like when you're watching, an amazing stand-up comedian, and that, they manage to weave everything together. There are some specials you watch that are just sort of joke. So they're all sort of separated, but some of the great specials, you get this amazing sort of, thread all the way through it that you realize is a thread all the way through it by the time they get to that sort of callback at the end, and they've tied it all up together. I mean, I think, for me, that's the goal with diving deep into character, so that, everything can be explained. You're not just doing something because, well, that would be cool, or that would be scary, or, everything is serving each other when you you do a deep dive on character, I think. And listen, there were great films there are fun films that exist that probably wasn't as much of a thing. Not that I'd name any of them just in case they really did dive into character, but why I write is to understand myself and people more. So why wouldn't I, dive into character first and then let everything build out of that? Well, I can send you, I'll email you the questions that I usually go through, and I'll send you
That'd be awesome.
the sort of workbook that James Hart sent me. But yeah.
So with dark comedy, it's intimidating. When I originally thought of this idea, I was like, oh, I don't know that I can write jokes. I feel like in my day-to-day
Mm.
life, I am funny with my friends and whatnot like that. But I don't know if that can directly translate. And so I'm curious for you, like, do you think being funny in real life is like a necessity for writing comedy? And do you think it translates almost across the board?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it was a necessity because I can think of a few examples of people that were never, comedians, let's say, that were never the funniest in their friend group, but I guess they were the most observant of the humor. Some people are just so naturally funny, but they might not know how to structure something when put under pressure to structure it. They just have the natural sort of, you know, off the cuff kind of personality. I think dark comedy, is called that because it's the stuff that's kind of in the recesses of your mind. So it's not like stuff that you have to have said out loud or ever wanted to say out loud, but works in a storytelling setting. I think for my philosophy is like, just write it. Don't go like, oh, is that a bit much? Or are people gonna get that? The only way you find out that people are gonna get it is you write it and you get people to read it. So I think don't self-censor before you've had any feedback. I have a lot of dark comedies that there were moments that we would send them around and we would get the feedback like, oh, I don't know if this is the time, for this, uh, you know, and that's the only way I would have known that is by just getting it out there. But through that, there are people that are like, love that tone of comedy and are like, well, we'll find something together anyway because we love your writing. It's just not this thing because, we don't want to destroy our reputation. But you just have to, get past whatever's holding you back and just write a thing. That's the only way to know. And if you find it funny, someone else is going to find it funny. It's kind of how comedy works. There's no one thing that someone finds funny and no one else in the world does. Even serial killers, have peers that find the shit they do funny. So, for dark comedy, you just got to push the envelope. And if the feedback is pull back a bit, and if you feel like you're happy to pull back a bit and pull back, but I would go all out first. I mean, and obviously, I think character still is important too. There are those silly comedies where the goal is for people to just sort of say funny shit, no matter who they are. But I think the best written comedies are the characters are so well fleshed out. The funny shit they say fits who they are and what they're about. If you watch like Eastbound and Down, there's no one character saying something funny just to say something funny. Like when they're saying something funny, it fits their character to a T.
What, in your opinion, separates the good dialogue from the bad dialogue?
The extremes of the sort of spectrum of dialogue is that, you can go too on the nose. There's no subtext. You're telling them exactly everything that this person's feeling. It doesn't feel natural. It's kind of melodramatic. That's always something to avoid. I wouldn't say it's something to avoid in an early draft. I think sometimes it's really useful to go really on the nose so that you understand what this character is trying to say in this scene and what their motivations are in this scene. You can go really, really on the nose and then figure out what's the subtext version of this. Like, for example, like one of the greatest bits of subtext, I think, is in Donnie Brasco. And he comes home from, being undercover, and he's like going through the cupboards and everything's in different places. And that's what he's complaining about is, where, I don't even know where the cereal is. The other day he's like, doesn't know where things are in his own home. And if you were to write that scene on the nose, it would be like, I've been undercover with the mob, and I want to come home, and I want everything to be exactly how I remember it, so I can feel comfortable at home, and it can be my escape from this crazy world that I have to sort of dive into. But you can't even put things in the right place, etc. But all he says is, the one line about the cereal, and it's like, you can start at that extreme, but just make sure you try and find a way to like cut back. But then at the same time, sometimes that subtext materializes in like an over stylized kind of monologue or something, and I think that's obviously something that we've all done, at least I think, in terms of like people in their 20s and 30s, is try and copy, Pulp Fiction and sort of do a sort of a Big Mac kind of a, monologue. Is fine to try, but I think that's the other extreme of dialogue where you're just overdoing the style. And also, I think, I don't know, you just got to speak it out loud or get someone else to speak it out loud and just see how natural it feels.
And then before we wrap things up, I want to ask, how important is reading for you as a writer?
Very important. Obviously, reading scripts. I think, that can be misleading for like young writers, because a lot of the times, the scripts that are released to us are shooting drafts. And even though it's cool to learn from those shooting drafts, I think for a young writer who maybe hasn't built up their confidence yet, it can be a bit daunting to look at what they've got and then look at something that's a shooting draft. But luckily there are some good early drafts available of some things. I think I remember reading like an early draft of like The Truman Show, and things like that like are still useful. And if it's just for formatting as well, then reading a shooting draft is fine. But yeah, I think it can be misleading. But books I read more books than I do scripts. Usually I'm reading like 3 books at a time, because I find it kind of helps. Again, it's like if you're looking at the brain as like a computer and you're just absorbing a load of questions, it's fun to like blend 3 different books and just see what comes out of it. See what comes out of the brain. At the moment, I'm reading a lot of the old sort of spy thrillers from like John le Carre and Len Dayton for this spy thriller that I'm doing.
Do you find that you're always reading something that's pertaining to the type of work that you're doing?
Yeah, I try to. I try not to do just that. If I'm reading 3 at a time, like 2 of them might be spy thrillers. If I'm doing a spy thriller, and then one of them might just be. There's a lot of great Irish writers out at the moment, so it would be something in that vein, or just something that feels like it's not linked to anything I'm doing, but it's just reading just for the pure entertainment sake of things. But again, very hard to do that, because halfway through a book you'll be like, actually there's some cool things that I can sort of take inspiration from. So yeah,
I've learned a lot about writing already, just from your processes that you go through. Thank you so much for taking the time to share how you got into writing, talk about O.C.D. and all that. It's been fascinating.
No, I appreciate you, man. It's a great show, and yeah, thank you for your time and for letting me ramble.